there is an audience, which is really nice. Thank you. So الجو عامل ايه دلوقتي في مصر؟ ربيع مش كده؟
اه الجو كويس، الجو جميل. هو بس في يومين جم برد كده، اسبوع من اسبوعين كده، بس الجو كويس جدا يعني.
برد؟ انتوا بتدلعوا بقى، برد معناها ايه؟ 19؟
اه 19.
19 تحت الصفر.
لا فوق فوق.
You know, we live in Minnesota, which is close to Canada. So in the winter, sometimes it gets minus 25, minus 40 sometimes centigrade. So my father used to complain about بيشتكي على الجو في مصر، الشتاء وحش السنه دي ومش عارف ايه، اقول له كام؟ يقول لي 19 درجه مئويه يعني. اقول له ده عندنا ماينس 25 تحت الصفر. يقول لا لا مش ممكن، ربنا عمره ما يسمع بحاجه زي كده. ف المهم الله يرحمه بقى.
الله يرحمه. انا بس انا ايه، ثانية واحدة انا
take your time, take your time.
ان شاء الله نبدأ بعد 5 دقائق دكتورنا العزيز.
السلام عليكم. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Shakir.
Good to see you. Good to see
Good
you.
to see you.
So, yeah, we were waiting for you to get started.
Thanks.
How's Copenhagen doing?
Good. It's sunny, and
Yes, should
I
be
think
beautiful.
today it's even more warm than Cairo.
Yes, well, yes.
Yeah, I've heard Cairo is really cold yesterday and today, but now it's spring and it's sunny. So yeah,
Yes.
I went out for a walk, and it's really nice because it's been really cold for like 3 months. But
So
now
where do you live in Copenhagen?
in an area that's 20 minutes from the city center, it's Suborg.
Okay, I know where it is. Yeah, I've
Okay.
been there. You know, I've been there like 40 times or so. And
Wow.
yeah. So
40.
yeah, I used to live in Atlanta, Georgia, which is warm. So I spent most of my winters in Sweden, Denmark,
Oh.
and Finland because I had an appointment in Finland. I had an appointment in Norwegian School of Management and also Stockholm School of Economics. So I used to shuffle between these and go to Atlanta and go back. But my primary appointment was obviously in the States, but these were my appointments, yeah. So I spent a lot of time. But the city looks incredibly different, especially around New Haven. You will see the water and all of this stuff. It will look like a totally different city in once you get to May, June, July, and then transition. Anyway, we better be quiet so the professor gets started. Yeah, get us started. Okay.
أنا طول ما أنا هبدأ حالا لحظة واحدة.
Yes.
Recording in progress.
Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian online seminar group. First, keep your phones off. Then, if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during his presentation or after his presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming the Professor Shakir Ahmed Zahra. Professor Shakir Zahra is Professor of Strategy at the University of Minnesota. Professor Shakir is one of the top business thought leaders in the world. Now we will start our seminar with dear Professor Shakir Zahra.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I have spoken to through this series twice before, so hopefully there is some familiarity. But today we'll be talking about something that's really important for all of us, which is how to write an empirical paper. At least in the American system, and I know it's in the European system as well, there is bias toward writing empirical papers, data-driven papers. So people misunderstand data-driven meaning that no theory, not at all. To the contrary, data creates theory, data allows us to test theory, data allow us to refine theories. So that's what the focus of this presentation is all about, how to write papers that do just that, to create new theories, advance or revise existing theories, or of course, challenge existing theory in many ways. So I will start by sharing my slides. And as the professor said, I don't know if you can see this or not. Do you see my slides? Sorry.
Not yet.
Sorry, then, okay, thank you. Do you see them now? No?
Not yet.
Okay, let me start again.
No problem.
Okay. I will share. Where did it go? Sorry. Okay. Can you see now? No?
Not yet.
No, Shakir, no.
Okay, thank you. I heard that Shakir, by the way, Sam, is this no?
No.
No.
I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So let's do that. Okay. I've done this many times and I've never had a problem. So no? No?
No, still no.
I'm frustrated. I apologize.
Problem, take your time.
I'll exit and I'll come back. Okay, for just
Yeah.
a second. I apologize.
Oh, yes. Now you share your desktop, dear Professor Shakir. Your mic is mute. You can open the PowerPoint and share.
Can you see this?
Yeah, it's perfect.
You should be able to see this. I apologize.
Yes.
We tested this earlier today and it worked fine. And here it is. So my sincere apologies. I hope I make it up to you. And again, as was being introduced, the idea was you can ask me as many questions at any point in time during my talk. I would like this to be a conversation rather than a lecture, if you will. As I mentioned, empirical papers are very, very important in our careers. In our system, at least, we do value empirical papers quite a bit, and especially early on in your career, people want to know if you can really do research. And so empirical papers are one way that schools, very good schools actually, value the kind of quality of work you do, because it gives us some idea. So in my talk today, I will do two things, and I'll offer kind of a step-by-step approach to writing papers. And basically, I'm going to focus on papers that are large-scale data-based. Large scale could be a big sample of companies in a given industry, large number of case studies, it could be experiments and so on. But I'm not going to talk about qualitatively oriented case studies like you do 1 or 2 cases, because these require different types of skills that very different from what I'm going to talk about. And we can do that some other time. One of the things I will also do is to try to give you, as I go section by section, step by step, and write in the papers examples that people have used, and just to illustrate what they have and have not done, and what to do and what to avoid in doing. Okay, again, the invitation is out there. Stop me at any point in time to ask me as many questions as you want. One of the things that I always, this is something I cherish, that quote. Einstein says, imagination is more important than knowledge. So I think they train us a lot in graduate schools about how to do research, correct? But they don't always teach us how to have imagination, how to show creativity. Good researchers know the rules, but they go beyond the rules. They use their creativity to overcome the limitations of their studies, for example, or they take the ideas or the data or their findings and give them very different meaning. So that's what this study is all about, what this quote is all about, that you need not to follow step by step everything that I'm saying. It's just a roadmap. But after that, then you need your creativity to use whatever. And you will see examples of this in a few minutes. The next quote is kind of very strange, and I hope it doesn't offend anybody. It says, in science as in love, too much concentration on technique can lead to impotence. Meaning, if nobody teaches you how to love somebody or to be with them or show your affection to them, you learn it, correct? If you read a book and follow step by step, they do that in comedy shows, correct? You go and read the book and try to apply it, it backfires badly. So the same thing, even though we're talking about techniques here today, again, be wise, be creative, and try to understand that these are just a roadmap rather than a specific recipe that you have to follow, strictly. One of the things that I tell my students, and I tell myself, and I have learned over a period of time, is that most of the papers are rejected before they are written. So most of the papers are rejected before they are written, whether they're theory or empirical, because they have not matured enough, they have not developed enough. So before you start even writing, you need to do a number of things. One of the things that you need to think about is what is the big idea behind the paper? What's the story you're trying to tell? Who is really interested in what you have to tell? So if it is just another paper for publication, that's one thing. But if you're trying to bring a new perspective or challenge existing theory or provide a different phenomenon and a different context, for example, these are different types of papers that kind of have make an important contribution. When you do that, when you start thinking about the story you're going to tell, or the point you're going to make, or the theory you're going to advance, or the context you're going to produce, you need to think about research as a performing art, meaning you go between theory and data, back to theory and data, iteration. That iteration, it's like the musicians. They write the tone multiple times before you just get that thing that makes it really work. By performing art, meaning there is a lot of practice. You need to get feedback. You need to ask people to get feedback. And I'm going to say this up front. One of the things early stage researchers make a mistake, one of the mistakes they make is that they're trying to be secretive. They are trying to be protective of their work. They think people are going to steal their ideas. And in fact, I say the opposite, and I found the opposite. The more I talk about my ideas, the more I develop ideas. People give me feedback. So test your ideas. Let them mature. Let them ripen, because that's really writing becomes much easier. So in, in doing this, you need to also think about theory. When you have data, really good papers are theory driven, or they introduce us to a brand new theory, or they revise our understanding of theory. So, and that's really the key thing. If you look into the top journals, whether the Academic Management Journal or whatever area you're in, you'll find that they're all theoretically driven, or at least at the end of the paper, they tell you this is what it means for theory, for example. So theory matters, and matters a great deal. So this iteration between theory and data, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, really very important. In doing your research, intangibles matter, and matter a great deal. Intangibles are the way you develop your sample, for example, the way you choose your subject. If you're doing interviews, the way you conduct your interviews, not only the content of the interviews, but how they're conducted, where they're conducted, by whom. All of these things really matter a great deal, and you need to think about them. Of course, the actual writing of the paper, if you write the paper, and the way, the layout, the design, the structure, the flow of the ideas, the vocabulary used, the language, the imagery, all of these become part of these intangibles that make the paper what it is. It's like if you go to theater, and by the time you show up to the theater, the color, the motif of the action, who's playing the different roles, the music, all of these intertwine to make the show. It's the same thing with an empirical paper, if you will. So before you get started, ask yourself, what am I trying to say? I'll come back to that again and again today in my presentation. To whom and why am I saying it? And why should they listen to me? What's the value added of my work? Okay, how do I know what I found is valuable, and how to communicate that value to my readers? You need to think about this. And I found out, actually, writing notes for myself, trying to answer these questions, I found it very useful. So I'm one of those people, I jot down ideas. I actually use my iPhone. If you steal my iPhone, they will find pages and pages of comments to myself about the papers I'm working on. Because I talk to different people, I get on the phone, I ask people questions, and that sort of interaction actually allows me to make my mind up about these kind of questions. What am I trying to say? Why do I care deeply about this subject matter? Actually, I think one of the biggest problems is in writing papers, empirical papers, especially early on. People will read somebody's paper and say, oh, I have data, I can do this. So what they do is, okay, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this, I wanted to say this. That's good. Okay, that's a good beginning. But what's different about what you're going to say from what they said? Does it extend it? Does it refute it? Does it demolish it? That will be really the argument that you need to make. And what kind of perspective do you bring to the table? What's your point of view that you bring to the table? So just before we get to the actual step by step, I just wanted to remind you, I think everybody knows what this slide is all about. A good paper is usually one that has a clear message, a good story to tell. Jay Barney wrote the resource-based view. He and I have been on panels like 40 times or so, or 30 times, or 40 times, or 50 times. I don't remember. It's a large number of times. And he always says this: a good paper has one good central idea, one good coherent argument. So if you have too many plots in the movie, in the story, you get confused. So you might have a lot of different things to build that argument, but you really have to have a central and one dominant central theme in the paper. Okay, for example, I'll give you an example for just a second. Avoid clutter, meaning too many ideas, too many different stories going on. So I like old movies. So I watch movies, and a lot of the movies have a lot of flashbacks. A couple of these episodes, they go back, and then they come back to real time, and go back in flash time, go back, and sometimes I get confused. That's even more so in writing academic papers. Academic papers are fairly straightforward. They are not novels. They are not fictions. People don't want to wait till page 25 to know what the plot is. We watch the movies and we'll say, oh, who killed this? Or are they going to get married? Or are they going to run away? That's really good for movies. But in academic writing, directness, straightforwardness, and revealing the plot early on and trying to develop the plot throughout the paper becomes really important. It's very important to have a clear scope for the paper. That's why the idea of one idea, one dominant theme, and be clear about, so what is new about that question that you're asking? What's new about the research that you're introducing, and what difference does it make? A good paper, and I'll keep going back to this again and again, is grounded in theory. I already mentioned this a couple of times. Also, we should recognize no paper is perfect. All papers are imperfect in one way or the other. The thing is, a good paper is honest. It tells you, we did this and this and this. This is not the most perfect data, or this is not the most perfect setting, but this is the best we could do. But this affects our results in this and this way. So they take the limitations of that. So the reader can make her or his mind up about this. We'll come back to this as we talk about the limitations of the study. A good paper is like a good movie. It has to have something that will make you at the end say, oh, this is really interesting. It gives you a satisfying, compelling, and clear conclusion. We will talk about how to do that later in my presentation. Okay, a good paper also keeps the reader in mind every step of the way. So I think many of us write because writing is very difficult. As many papers as I've written, I find writing to be extremely, extremely painful. And I have learned to write my own way. And very few people write my way because everybody's structured, the sequential, and so on, which is great. But the thing is, regardless of how you write and how comfortable you are with your writing style, the paper is not about you. The paper is about how the reader is going to see the paper, correct? So there are two audiences here. You trying to get your ideas on writing. The other one is how to make your writing accessible, your ideas accessible to the reviewer. So if you are watching a movie, these guys or the actors spend a lot of time, and the director and so on, trying to make sure that you get their story. They do certain things to make sure you don't fall asleep. They're connected with the story. So the same thing. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit. So writing, meaning you keep the reader in every step of the way. So you use the right vocabulary, the right transition, the way you organize. Transition meaning movement from one idea to the next, from one section to the next. You connect the different parts of the paper, and you really make your language accessible. So if you are in doubt, write in simple, plain, clear English rather than really very difficult, complicated language. So I read all of these papers, and some of the papers, really great papers, are written by people who are really great in writing. But they give you an example, they give you illustrations, they give you things that you say, okay, let me summarize what I have been talking to you for the last 3 pages. Let me summarize what I said, or to recap what I did. This is their way of trying to keep you engaged, to keep you, in mind. So we'll do that. They start by giving you a story, for example, at the beginning. They hook you, if you will, and then every step of the way, they keep reminding you of what they have been doing, for example. Okay, obviously, we all have seen empirical papers, and there is a long list. You have the abstract. One thing that's not listed here is the title. I'll get back to that, actually. Abstract, introduction, the theory and hypothesis, the methods, the analysis, the results, limitations, implications, future research directions, and of course, references. I'm not going to talk about the references. That's not what I'm going to do, except to remind you that it depends on the quality of the journals that you're going to submit your work to. So the better quality of the journals would expect you to actually ensure that the classic papers are included, correct? And the big conversations in that area are also represented in your paper. So the more, they are not being snobby. They wanted the better journal represented because the review process in the better journals is more demanding. So we know a little bit more about the quality of the work you're going to do. So as I said a few minutes ago, you keep the readers in mind. Also, you keep your audience in mind. So to make sure that what I have done is, before you get started, You need to think about your idea. What am I trying to communicate? To whom? What is new about my idea? Why they should care about my idea? Then you start thinking about how you're going to put your thoughts into writing, correct? So one of the first places you can start to kind of doing a little bit of that is in the abstract. So I'll be talking about abstract, and then I will follow on each one of these areas. Again, feel free to stop me, anytime you have a question. The abstract of the paper is really, really important. It's the second thing that we see about the paper. The first thing we see about the paper is probably the title and the authors, correct? People look into the abstract. When we get the journals, at least in my case, I flip through the abstracts very quickly to see if this is something I care about or not. Okay, if there are abstracts that are written in Greek or something, I don't know what they're under, so I probably will skip these. But the abstracts that are written in a way that's accessible, easy to understand, close to my topic, close to my interest, or the topic that I don't know much about, but it's new topic or new authors bringing new ideas, I would like to look at this. Then that gives me an idea about to look into this. So going back to the movies. So at least when I go to the movies and I'm sitting in the theater, before they show the main attraction, they tell you coming next week or the week after this coming movie, and they give you like 1 minute preview of the next movie, correct? Even on TV, they will, before they show some of the movies, they say, after this movie, we're going to show this movie. Let me show you a little bit about this. That's what an abstract is all about. An invitation for you to sample the movie that's coming up, and an invitation to sample the paper you're going to read. Okay. Here is an example from Journal of Business Venturing, written by, I just saw it the day before yesterday. It's about the origin of organizational capabilities in young new ventures. It has to do, so here are a couple of things about the abstract. It's kind of very descriptive. It tells you what they're looking into. They're going to look into where capabilities come from, whatever these capabilities are. Secondly, they are going to tie resource allocations, capability development, and the performance of new companies. So they are going to focus on new companies and capabilities and so on. Then they give you a little bit of the argument that they're showing. Why are they studying this? Resource constrained new ventures need to decide how to allocate their resources to develop internal functional capabilities to achieve and growth, meaning they need capabilities to grow. Drawn on the longitudinal database, that's how they collected the data from the Kaufman Foundation. Okay, startups, we explore performance implication of broad versus narrow scope of new venture functional capability development, and I show how they tell you what they have done. Again, and where they got their data. This is a well-established database that you can use online. It's easily available. And then they find this and this and this, and they find that this is conducive to performance and all of this stuff. Then they do something at the end. They say, studying these issues in entrepreneurial firms does this. Informs our development of capabilities in a firm competing under time and resource constraints. Obviously, they don't tell you everything they have done in the paper. These are like 100 words, 150 words maximum. Sometimes journals limit you to 75 words. So, but they give you, there is, a broad but quick view of what the paper is all about. So you would know they're going to study capability development, the effect of capability and performance, how these companies develop, allocate resources in young companies. That's what it is. This is a longer abstract. Okay, it's about crowdfunding, which is another way a lot of people use nowadays to collect money or to raise money for their projects. And this about crowdfunding environmentally sustainable projects. And this is a cross-country, the effect of cross-country heterogeneity and environmental support system or something like that. Very complicated topic. Okay, so what do the authors do? So I'm just going to show you the recipe that they use. The first thing, they give you the phenomenon. They are studying the broad umbrella issue. Past research has told us that companies or ventures focused on addressing sustainability face difficult challenges in attracting funds from traditional sources. They're telling us this is an important topic, but it has been, these companies have a unique problem. They cannot access money from traditional sources like banking and all of this stuff. So they, while crowd, then the next part of their argument is that there is a gap in the literature, or there is a question in the literature, how these companies raise this money, correct, to deal with this. While crowdfunding could ease resource limitation of these through crowdfunding, they talk about how they can access the backers or people who support them from different places across the globe, because crowdfunding, and you use the platform to access different people around the globe. So they tell you that people have not done this. Then they tell you we have collected, studied this in terms of looking into flow of funding from around the globe to social ventures, if you will, using this, all of these companies, at only 9,000 companies campaigns from Kickstarter, which is a platform located, and these companies projects are located in 139. So it's an international study, correct? And there is a lot of, then the next part, they tell you, what did they find? That we found this and this and this. I'm going to leave the slides at the end of my talk, and you can look into this a little bit more, but this is the recipe. The phenomenon, the research question that you addressed, it's a little bit more detailed than the last slide, the last example. What did you actually do? What you find? What does it tell us about the theory, for example? Okay, it tells us, it challenges our long-held assumptions about the role of institutions and cross-funding money. Obviously, if you are into entrepreneurial finance, you will, that kind of vocabulary is fairly familiar. So, so very quickly, in 150 words or so, you gave the review. This is a more complicated topic. For example, if you look into one paper that I was reading this morning before I got online, was like, does government support for innovation project, does government tax credit improve innovation? A study of Chinese certification program. That's the title of the paper. So very quick, and you look into that, Chinese government has introduced this program, and other countries have done the same thing. But do these programs work or not? That's the gap in the literature. We have evidence that sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. But under what conditions do they work and do not work? That's the gap. And here is what we have done. We studied like 2,000 companies from China, and we found this and this and this, and this is what it tells us. So the recipe is exactly what the blue boxes here say. The phenomenon, the question, what did you do, what you found, and why is it important? So the abstract, then, to summarize, has to be short, has to be clearly written. It introduces the problem. It tells you what you have done in one sentence or maximum two. What are your key findings or conclusions, and what are your implications on that? So the thing is, a good abstract is like the good preview of a good movie. It excites you, entices you. So it has to be simple. It has to be easy. And also, you don't have to read the article to understand the abstract. So this abstract right here, actually, it's one of my papers, so I can critique it. It's complicated, very complicated. And so we're going to clean it, and we'll improve it, we'll shorten it, and the title will change quite a bit to communicate it. But this is like a whole, our draft of that, in fact. So it should be able, you should be able to understand what the paper, generally speaking, is all about from those 100 words, and that's what it means, standalone. Okay. Any questions? Any comments? Okay. If not, I'm going to move to the next part, which is again some of the mistakes people make. So sometimes people. One of my good friends, very famous guy, I'm sure you read his work, Howard Aldrich, used to say, if I write the title if I write the abstract, the paper is done. So what means in his mind is that I know what the paper is all about. If I have a good title and I'm clear about the title and read about the abstract, it is done. Some people do that, and some people write the abstract and then they struggle with writing the paper, correct? And I found it very useful in my case to write a draft like the one I have just shown you. And I can when I finish the paper and I know what the paper is all about, I go back and revise and revise and revise again until I get the abstract really to format that I want. It's much easier to do that when you know what the paper is all about. So I write the draft, then it's a working draft. I know it's going to change, but I keep improving it as the paper gets improved. So the next part of the after the abstract is we all know it. It's the introduction. You know, some people have actually the word introduction. Some journals don't have the word introduction, and it depends. Introduction, generally speaking, there is the format, again, the recipe for that. Describe what the area that you're working on and what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do what you're trying to do. So the big area that you're working on and what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it, how you're going to try to do it, why should I listen to you, correct? Trying to teach you. Now, this is really where you try to grab the attention of the review, not only the reviewer, but the reader. Okay, so describe the area you're working in, orient the reader by telling him or her what you're studying, why you're studying it, what's new about your perspective, and then tell me the approach you're going to use and how you're going to get there. We'll talk about this a little bit. And why should I expect from you, from the paper? Okay, if I read this, what will be the big aha, the big finding? So don't keep me in suspense. This is not a movie, for example, or a novel. So the last time I talked to this audience, I described like a funnel approach or a three-stage approach that I use, and that actually is very helpful. I think about it this way, in terms of telling the reader what I'm thinking about. Okay, the big area, I'm looking into crowdfunding of social ventures, correct? Within the topic that I'm interested in is the role of institutions in affecting the flow of capital crowdfunding across international borders, correct? Then what is the research questions? Why, under what conditions institutions make it possible for this flow to happen or stifle this flow, for example? That is the research question that I have, okay? Another example would be this. Okay, how do new companies create advantage? And again, the notion of competitive advantage is companies creating more superior superior performance and sustain it over a period of time. New companies are fairly disadvantaged because they don't have the reputation, they don't have the legitimacy, they don't have the resources, they are not well connected, and so on and so forth. So their ability to create advantage is always in question, okay? So against all of these odds, why do some new ventures, create advantage and others don't? A big discussion in the literature and the strategy of new companies and in the entrepreneurship literature. There are different ways to answer this question. I could be interested in the role of human resources. I could be interested in technological resources. I could be in how these companies manage institutions, the legal institutions. How do they build political ties that affect them? So that's the perspective that I choose. So let me give you a different perspective. How do they focus on the argument that I will make is, companies might differ in their ability to exploit the opportunities. Everybody's really thinking about they find opportunities, but some of them are much better than others in using their assets and resources to exploit opportunities. It has not been examined. So I have to tell the reader, why am I choosing that, correct? Why is opportunity exploitation a really important one, okay? How do they use, more specifically, I'm really interested in how they use their networks to exploit opportunities to create disadvantage. So I went from the very, very broad to the more and more and more specific. So I went from, there is a big debate about the sources of competitive advantage. There are like 5 different ways they can do this. I'm going to focus on one, which is the exploitation. And within this, I will focus on one and only one way they do this. It's not that the others are not important, but in this paper, I'm going to focus on that, correct? So I acknowledge the existence of these other things, but I'm going to tell the reader why I'm focusing on networks. What do I mean by networks? Where do these networks come from, correct? Are the networks by new companies different from well-established companies? Why are some of these companies more capable of leveraging their networks and others are not? And why certain networks are much more conducive to opportunity exploitation than others? So that's my argument. So I went from big kind of, it's like inverted pyramid. The top of the pyramid is or the base of the pyramid up. That's the big broad debate. And then the red box here, the opportunity exploitation, is the perspective or the area that I'm going to focus on. And then the research questions that I'm going to do. And every step of the way, I'm telling the reader why I'm choosing this. Why should I care about why new firms create advantage, for example? Okay, because in many ways, actually, it's a practical question that I can use to motivate the discussion. Could be a policy orientation that we say many countries are worried about their companies not being able to survive and achieve success. And these companies are the kind of important for the growth of the national economy. Or of course, you can say from a theory perspective, okay, these companies have all of these liabilities, these disadvantages, but they still succeed. So how do they make it? How do they make it? Because if I know how they make it, I can learn a great deal about how to improve competitive advantage, correct? That's the argument. And in writing papers, and that's, I think, a significant difference between journals. The better journals will say, start with the theory. You not start with the phenomenon, but very quickly tell me about the theory behind it. Some other journals, good journals, but they could start with the phenomenon. I'm not really worried about this, or it could be even policy, like research policy, and some journals, and more and more of the European journals have a research policy orientation. Even some of the entrepreneurship journals are moving into the policy implications. So let me go back one slide again. You start with the big conversation in the field, the area, the broad area. Why do younger, role of competitive advantage and success and failure, but younger companies are at a disadvantage, and these disadvantages come from this and this and this, which would mean that they will not be able to succeed. But we see in reality that many of them are able to succeed or have the potential to succeed. Okay, there are different ways they can do this. And one area that has not been examined is opportunity exploitation, for example, that I mentioned, and or internationalization, or whatever focus you're going to. And then within this, I'm going to focus on this one thing, correct? And that's the way you build your argument step by step. One of the things that I found out to be extremely useful, and I look for it when I review other people's paper, I said, okay, what is the research question? What is your research question? If you tell me your research question, I can follow you. Okay, because it tells me where we can meet, correct? So try to place it as early as you can in the introduction, correct? So again, one of my former colleagues, he retired a few years ago, Michael Lubetkin, he said, if I can write or say my research question clearly, I can easily write the paper. If I know what the question is, you communicate a lot with the audience, you communicate with yourself, and that becomes the central part of your writing, correct? Because that's the point of destination. That's your GPS, like you know where you're going to go. That's the one thing that I wanted to answer. Okay, can you have more than one research question? Yes, but there has to be one clear theme that ties these questions that you have. The more questions you have in one paper, the more complicated the communication and with the reader is. But it is okay to have more than research question, but you need to connect them. Okay, they need to have a common theme, correct? You have to state that clearly. As I mentioned already, try to put it as early as you can on the paper. So one of the people in the literature that in entrepreneurship that a lot of you know his name, Scott Shane, was a very, very good friend of mine. When he was an assistant professor, he lived close to us, worked like 2-3 minutes from where I lived. Scott was really one of the best writers I know of. He's not only a good writer, he's a good thinker, and that's why he's a good writer. So if you know, so one of the things I have difficulty with myself is to do this thing about getting to the research question, by page 2. And he actually had the strangest ability. He will get to the research question at the bottom of the first or second paragraph. Very quickly, he goes through those 3 things: the area, the perspective, the research question. He knows how to get to it very quickly. He is able to do that. There are a lot of people who are able to do that. So try to kind of stream writing that. And I think part of it is when you know what the scope of the paper is all about, and you know what to do. I think there is. Could you please explain how we use theory and paper if we use the RBV example, deal with along with the paper? Okay, I promise I'll get to that. Okay, I'll get to that question in a second. So I will, the question about theory in the paper. Okay. So for some reason, it stopped sharing. It stopped moving. Okay. I'm sorry for some. Okay, we have. Okay, so we're here. Okay, you need, I already mentioned this. So for example, one of the things people do, and I'll go to the question of, there is this debate in the literature. Do we really focus on theory or phenomenon, theory and phenomenon? For me, that's a false dichotomy. I think you can use theory and context in alignment. Even if you have a phenomenon that you wanted to do, you can invoke theory, for example. For example, you need to tell the reader what you're going to study. For example, since some of you are from Egypt online, so I decided to study, to mention something I worked on many, many years ago. I did not study Egypt. I studied Eastern Europe, Poland, and other countries like that. And I did a special issue of the Economic Management Review. Oh, this was like 20 years ago, and on privatization and of state-owned enterprises. Okay, that's a phenomenon, and it could be, I can study it from multiple perspectives. I'm looking to effect of that on human resource capital, for example. Yeah, do people who work for these newly privatized companies become better innovative or not, or better loyal to the companies or not? So I can use multiple theories to do this. One theory is an institutional theory. What changes in the institutions that would lead to changes in employee behavior? I could use a human capital perspective, which means that these newly privatized companies are likely to invest in building their human capital and so on. So even though I started with a phenomenon, I'm already using a theory to explain that, correct? So let me give you another example. Where do privatized companies get their advantage? Actually, we can use multiple theories here. One explanation will be agency theory. So agency theory said publicly held companies become inefficient over a period of time because of the separation of ownership and control. Managers become dominant. They don't care about the interests of the shareholders. They actually don't invest in R&D. They don't invest in innovation. They expand the company beyond their normal means, and their bureaucracy creeps into the organization, so adaptation becomes more and more difficult, okay, over a period of time. At least that's the literature from the United States. Okay, and then actually Europe, and now we know from Japan and China, even in the newly, the companies that have gone into that. Okay, that's one explanation. But if we say these private companies, privatized companies, companies that go private, okay, we can use the same argument to say this is a reversal of agency problem. There is a better alignment of interest between these organizations and between managers of these companies, the owners, and the organization. And therefore, we should see better performance. And that's actually a lot of the literature talks about this. The special issue that I mentioned talks about this. Because of this alignment, we should see more innovation, see more creativity, more entrepreneurship, and so on. Another argument we can use goes back to the RBV, the resource-based view of the firm. The argument is that because of this alignment of interest, okay, we are going to develop or acquire or deploy our resources differently. For example, the kind of people we're going to hire, the kind of people we're going to promote, the couple of human capital that we are going to have will be very different. Type of capabilities we're going to be different, correct? There is also very serious investment in kind of revamping the strategic direction of the company, which will mean more and more redeployment of organizational resources to make sure that they're valuable, rare, and immutable, and organizationally embedded, as Barney would argue. So the RBV could be an interesting setting, for example, in a case like that. So again, I don't want to forget the point. The point I'm trying to make is in the introduction, you need to tell the person we're going to study this and this, which is your research question. We're going to study this in emerging economies, for example, or we're going to study it in the context of a country in Asia. I'm using Egypt intentionally because I got several emails over the last several months and said, well, I have difficulty publishing papers with data from Egypt. I bet you the Chinese people had the same problem a few years ago. Japanese people 20 years ago had the same problem. It is not Egypt. Definitely, it's not Egypt. It's not Japan. It's not Korea. It's not whatever. It's just the reviewers don't understand about the setting. And you don't explain the review. You take results from the UK or France or the United States and say, okay, now it has not been done in Egypt, and therefore we need to do it in Egypt. You need to justify why we need to do it in Egypt. It's not that Egypt is not important, but why should we expect the results to be different from Egypt? Again, Chinese scholars had the same problem 10 years ago. Everybody said, oh, China is an emerging economy, and the results that found in the United States do not necessarily apply to China. That might be true, but why? What is unique about the experience that will allow you to do this? By the way, if the data came from Norway or Sweden and so on, they will encounter the same issue because we're more familiar with the European as well as the North American databases. So you need to explain why you study this. It doesn't the setting or the context in which you're going to do. It does not mean it's a bad thing. It just means you need to communicate it better. Why this is unique and what can we learn from doing this? Another way to make the argument is, for example, what other economies around the world that resemble Egypt that would benefit from this finding, correct? Not only how different are the findings from Egypt between Egypt and Europe or the United States, but what other countries, what kind of new lessons we're going to do this? Is this a case in point? This is like something that resembles many other countries because it helps us to create what we call mid-range theories. They are not universalistic theory. Okay. We used to explain and support the main data. We used it to explain and support I don't know what the question means, but in using the theory, when you use theory, you use it to explain what you're doing, justify the predictions you're going to do. You also use the theory to explain your findings and explain what they mean to the field. So it's in the beginning, middle, and end. So you cannot just put it in one place and you stop. Actually, it is in the beginning, in the introduction, middle in terms of the design and analysis, at the end in terms of explaining your results. Okay, so I'll come back to this again as we move forward. Okay, if I, for some reason, it gets stuck. Okay. So in one more thing that you need to mention in the introduction, you need, if you're bringing a new perspective, if you're using a new theory or a new setting or a new explanation, so that you can say in prior research focus into explanation A and B, I'm bringing a new perspective. That's C. Okay, fair enough. I'm willing. What's wrong with A and B? Correct. How different is your new perspective from those? Why should I listen to that? So you need to explain the why, and that's what I mean. Keeping the reader in mind every step of the way. You need to explain to them what to expect. Okay, how are you going to get there? And if if I'm going to listen to you, so what do you think I'm going to get from this discussion? I just want to go back to the issue of the setting, the context, the phenomenon. So there are different ways in terms of thinking about this when you're theory building. There are papers that are universalistic, independent of the setting. Here is a good paper by Ishin Guler, a good friend of mine. She's at UNC Chapel Hill, in institutions and internationalization of U.S. Venture capital, correct? U.S. venture capital. So the arguments in her paper, even though she's looking into the United States venture capital and how they internationalize, correct? The arguments, if you read the paper, are very universalistic. They transcend the United States. So the United States just becomes an example of many other countries like that. And a lot of the studies we do are like this, correct? The universal, they have generalizability that go beyond their setting. So that's one type. Another type, cross-country over time. Status in a strange land, again, one of the papers by Ishan, and context-dependent value of status in cross-border venture capital. You can tell that she does a lot of work on venture capital. She's looking into status, how people relative standing between different groups and individuals, and if this changes across border venture capital. Again, so she's looking into multiple countries, kind of comparative, and if you look into her study, it across time, it varies across time. That's a really interesting, attractive design, because you can see the change happening in the setting, and you can see if the theory still applies equally well over time and across different countries. This is one of my papers that came out only a few months ago. Well, actually, 6 months ago, 9 months ago. Founder team experience, asset or liability for growth, startup growth. Again, we're looking to a paradox. Okay, we're looking into high technology industries. We're looking into young companies, and we're looking into the founder team experience. Does it help or hinder new venture growth? So one of the things about this is that there is a tension, because experience gives you a lot of knowledge, but this knowledge could be outdated. So it is, and if you are working in high technology industries where the change is very rapid, for example, your experience loses value very quickly. So if you keep using the same experience, will this matter at all? So this is very much based on the arguments in there. If we remove high technology from the analysis, the argument will not stand. Why? Because industries that are fairly stable, the role of experience could be profound and could be persistent over a period of time. Okay. Well, there is a comment in the margin as, okay. So I already mentioned a lot of these things. So one of the things that you need to do that I have not mentioned is, when you introduce a terminology, again, you need to define that very quickly. Don't assume that people know. Okay, if there is a well-established definition in the literature, introduce it. If not, use your own vocabulary to express it. So I was reading this paper today, and the author talks about innovation and innovation plasticity. Plasticity, it becomes like plastic. So I know, generally speaking, what the authors were trying to do. So I had to look into the dictionary to look into plasticity. It comes from physics, actually, when things stop becoming fluid and they turn into plastic. But then you cannot change it, correct? It would have been really nice if the author told me that that's when companies become more and more rigid, moving from fluidity into that. So it will be easier, so I don't have to look into my Google to find that. So again, the more you do this, the more try to explain things as you go. It makes it easier for the audience to understand it. Also, you need to collect, okay, be selective in citing the literature. Selective in two different ways: the kind of journals and the kind of authors you wanted to cite, because that is a source of credibility. If you cite the best established authority in the field, then we have some faith in what you're saying, that this has been validated through the review process, correct? Secondly, in terms of the quality of the journals, again, because again, wanted to make sure that these papers have gone through a good review process and we know that the results are valid and so on. One of the things that people do is they almost copy back the abstract and the paper, and just to make sure that people know what they did, don't do that. The abstract should be on stand on its own. Okay. Any questions or comment? I'm gonna, if I can move, for whatever reason it stops. Here we go. One of the things I found out to be extremely useful and helpful, and I actually learned this from my co-authors now, some of my students are much better than me in this, and they try to give you a preview of the paper. Preview of the paper, like one paragraph that summarizes what the paper is all about. What is the objective of the paper? Why is it important? What did you do and why you did it, correct? Just describing the sample, what you found, and why are you, found. That's what I'm saying, don't repeat the abstract. But because this is a little bit more detailed than the abstract. You're connecting it to the theory. The phenomenon is this, we're using this theory, and the theory led us to these predictions, and this is what we have done, and this is what we found. It has more meat than abstract. So it's a little bit more detailed, but it gives you, like, I can take this abstract, and sometimes I go through this. When I look into the abstract and I'm really interested in the paper, I look for that paragraph if it's there or not, and I start looking into it. Then I can say, oh, this is something I really wanted to do. One of the things I really think is very essential for you in the introduction somewhere to do this is to summarize your potential contribution. Here is what the paper is all about. Here is what we add to the literature and why it's important. I'll come back to that because this is one key part of because later in the paper you have to elaborate on that. So what we have done in the introduction is we're trying to attract the reader to understand what we have done, the area we're studying, the perspective I'm bringing, and the research question I'm trying to answer it. I'm bringing the literature to say what the theory and the setting are all about. I'm giving the reader a little bit of a preview of what the paper is all about. And then I'm kind of summarizing or highlighting what is new about my results and what do they mean. Okay, that's what we have done. Try to do that in a few pages, like some people say 3-4 pages. Some journals are more tolerant, but usually it's about 4 pages. So it's a lot of material. So that's why I said, don't rehash, don't have a lot of clutter, just focus on the main ideas, be selective. That's why it's really important because of that. Okay. So I found over the years that writing the contribution is, and I'll talk about this quite a bit later, finding that thinking about the contribution is very, very difficult for me. It's really, and it remains one of the most difficult things I do. And I know everybody I work with says the same thing. So sometimes I actually get those cards. I can show you. I have several of them on the floor next to me. I'm just cleaning my office to look clean when I'm talking to you. So what I do is to say, here is what we know. Okay, here is what I found. Correct. Are they in line? If aligned or not? If they are aligned, so what does it mean? We're supporting existing theory, and so what does that really mean? Well, if they're in conflict, does it mean that the theory is not valid, or it might be my results are not valid, or it's a different perspective and different explanation that we have not thought about? And if it is a new explanation and we have not thought about before, that's a big, big, big deal. It's a big contribution. So how can we use that moving forward, for example? That will be the way. So I don't always have a table like this, but I have those little cards that I take notes on. I actually write a lot about this because I discipline myself because it's really, really difficult. Okay. One of the things that you always struggle with, I always struggle with, that's why I assume everybody else struggles with, is how to start the introduction. How do you get the reader to read the first paragraph? Again, going back to one of my former friends, really good friends, who retired a few years ago, Michael Lobatkin from, at the time, University of Connecticut, he used to say, I know if once I write the abstract, once I finish the first paragraph, I am all done. The rest is just fluff, meaning a lot of stuff. If I know how to write the introduction. The first paragraph and the introduction really are very important because they grab the attention of the reviewer. Come, read me, okay? I have something really interesting to do. This is the advertising in a way, but we don't advertise. It had to be attention grabbing and to get the interest. How do you do this? There are different ways, different techniques, okay? You see that in some of the movies. They see a person seeing somebody standing there waiting for the bus, and somebody all of a sudden comes in and hit him, correct? And they run away. You don't know why they hit him, who these people are, and that shocks you, correct? Or you see a woman walking in the street and a man walking behind her, she slaps him, correct? And that's another way of doing this, correct? The same. But in academia, who cannot get women kissing men and all of this stuff, who can get a provocative quote. The president of the there is no president of the United Nations. So-and-so said this, or a famous scholar said this, and said this. And this is paradoxical. Penrose, in her famous book about this and this, argued this. But we find from the literature that this is not very well supported. Provocative statistics, every year, 2.5 million people get fired. And these people are the age of 55, and many of them can never find work. How does society absorb that? A provocative statistic. Contradiction in literature. The resource-based theory says this, but the human capital theory contradicts this by saying this. Or the human resource-based, the RBV says this, but research does not support it in these conditions. That's another one. Debate in the literature. Okay, are emerging markets more risky than well-developed markets? It sounds so strange to ask that question because emerging markets don't have any institutions, but well-established markets as well have problems with their institution. Trump, for example, you know what I mean? Paradox, something that contradict each other. All use the traditional approach. The base of the pyramid up, correct the big area to your perspective, to your research question. That's what this is all about. And the last item is my favorite. I have used it 2-3 times. When I got stuck, I did not know what to do. Sometimes my brain cannot work. I cannot get even started. And when I don't know, I actually do this. The last one I said, in this study, I would like to do this and this and this. This is really important because of this. And what we don't know is this and this and this. And we need to know this because of this and this. To address these questions, I'm going to do this and this and this. 2 advantages for that approach. One, it gets me very quickly to the research question. From the beginning, you know what I'm going to tell you. Okay? Number two, it unblocks my brain. If I don't know how to get a fancy code or a fancy statistics, or I don't know how to summarize the literature, I actually start from my own strength. Okay, I can get unblocked, and then in the next paragraphs, I can develop the argument steady. I can bring the literature in, I can bring the theory in, I can bring the setting in, and I can do that. It helps me unblock quite a bit. I remember this is a long time ago. I have a paper, it's Pearson Zahra actually, in Journal of Management Studies. We had a revise and resubmit. I will answer the question in just 1 second. And we had like 4 months to revise it. And for the first 3 months, I could not at all get myself to write one sentence in terms of the review. And one day I honestly said, you know, this is not going to be done. So I went to the library, I decided to hide and think about it, and I couldn't come up with ideas. Then the next day I just got a blank sheet of paper with a long pen and said, in this study, we studied this and this, and we did all of this. And it really helped me unblock my, unblock. Yes, somebody has raised his hand. I'd be happy to listen to the question.
Yes, Professor, hello.
Hello.
A great presentation, by the way. I really enjoyed it. I'm a student from Broca University, Canada, and
Yes.
I had a question about writing the contribution. So the thing is, you made a great point about the research question having to be, you know, a research question that people care about, right?
Yes.
And so if we tackle a research question like that, why then is the contribution hard to write? Doesn't it follow that if the research question is important, the contribution to answering it should also be obvious, kind of? So it is hard for me to write the contribution, but I don't understand. Like sometimes I tackle research question, but then the contribution is hard to write. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I know I know a couple of people at Brock, actually, very wonderful place. Okay, so and you're close to us too. So very much neighbors. Okay, so yes, it looks like a paradox. If we know the question, then we should be able to write the stuff. But I think the contribution. The reason why it is difficult, I think, is that we need to think beyond what we have done. It's not just describing what we have done and what we found. It's what it means, in what ways it moves the theory, what moves the field in beyond what we now know. Can we envision situations where our arguments are likely to be valid? You know what I mean? There are some cases, depending on the journal that you write into, if you write into a paper for one of the topmost journals, that becomes, because you're dwelling in the land of the abstractness. You're thinking about futures that do not even exist, or situations that do not exist. But if you're writing to a middle tier or lower tier journalist, probably the contribution is more concrete. We validated this, we extended this, and so on. So the better the higher quality journal, I think, the more abstract the contribution will be. I promise you that I have a couple of slides on this, and I'll come back to that a little bit more. If you don't mind, if I have not answered your question, please remind me. How is that?
Yeah, got it. Thank you, Professor.
Did I at least touch on what you said?
Yeah, but what I got from it is that you need to abstract from the specific context and look to how this is going to affect future theories or current theories, or that's right? Yeah. Okay.
And also one of the things that you said, what you have said, which is right. You can think about what other settings that are very similar to this. You know what I mean? That will be benefit from the finding, for example, or will contradict the finding. Some people are really clever because they're creative. They can think of scenarios where the results may or may not apply, and so on. Again, for some reason, this stops. It doesn't move. There is a conspiracy here. Okay, the body of the paper, and the body of the paper, I think that's where they train us the most in graduate schools. That's how you bring the literature in, how you develop your hypothesis, how you advance your stuff, and how this is, I think most of us are comfortable with this. Okay, for the empirical section, again, make sure that, as I already mentioned, you need to kind of remind the reader what your research question is, why is it important, and why now, and why is it timely in this discussion. Some papers do advance a model by all means if you do this. And I find that even if I don't include a model in the paper, I actually, when I write, I have a graph. I do have a lot of graphs, and because it forces me to think about the relationships. I'm going to trying to do that. When you present the graph or the model, and they're not always the same, you need to be clear about what this is all about. You need to use your own simple language to introduce it, and wherever you can connect it to the literature. I'm going and we'll come back to that. Here you need to talk about the theory. Theory becomes very visible here. The gentleman who asked earlier about theory. Theory is in the middle, in the beginning, in the middle, and end. In this, everything you're going to do, like if I'm going to look into this relationship right here, relationships are not the circles, it's the arrows. These are what this affecting this. Okay, why is this relationship important? Why do I need to think about it? Okay, how does it work that this is affecting this? Why can't we say that this affects this, the reverse relationship? How can we exclude that in theorizing and in the design? That's really an important part. Okay, what are the different mechanisms? If you're going to use different means by which, or mechanisms by which this affects this, which one are you going to focus on and why? You need to explicate, you need to be clear about your aim. And in doing this, you can rely on the theory. The theory says this. The fact that you're invoking the theory does not mean you're answering the question. It means you are kind of adding credibility. Consistent with the RBV, we find that the more organizationally embedded the human capital of the organization, like in the culture of the organization, the more likely they have they update their knowledge, for example. I don't know what the argument was in this case. Again, why are we using this relationship? Why is the graph like this? I think you need to be clear, more explicit, and all of this stuff. So, and in every single case, you don't have to use the word new. You can say, here is this differ from the literature, or this is something that has not been examined in the literature, and we need to examine it because, again, you need to kind of signal why the newness and the source of newness, and then you need to state your predictions. Remember, hypotheses are probabilistic statements, or statements about what is likely to happen. We're not deterministic statements. If A happens, B is likely to happen. It's not causality always. It's not all, you have to do a lot of things to determine causality. Do fat people usually die younger? For example, a bad question. There is high probability they will die younger because they will have all of these other diseases. That's a probability. It's a hypothesis, correct? It's not always a fact unless it accumulates over an extended period of time in multiple settings. So you have to be careful about the language in terms of indicating likelihood. Hypotheses should be logical. Okay, they make sense. Consistent, internally consistent with the theory, or consistent with what we know from the theory. If they deviate from theory, that's even better, but you need to tell us why we should believe the alternative explanation or the predicted. They should not be obvious. If you tell me that tomorrow is going to be the spring, beginning of the spring, that's very obvious, correct? We know that, that's a fact, well-established fact. But if you say, if you live up north, correct, it's likely to snow. That's not tomorrow. Maybe there's some validity depending on where you live. So you have to think about non-obviousness, meaning things that we cannot logically, kind of commonsensically predict. So Ian Macmillan, very famous professor from Wharton School, used to say this, and we used to teach the Dr. Consortia together, and he used to say this. He developed what he calls the 6 wise men rule. If you ask 6 reasonably intelligent people like you and me, I assume we all are, okay, how do you think this relationship is going to be? If they all predicted in the same direction, then this is obvious. if they all agree on the direction of the relationship, it's very obvious. If we know the answer or we know there is agreement on the direction, probably that's not very interesting. We want something that is probabilistic, is under certain conditions is likely to materialize. So one of the things I did notice, and I have gotten a few submissions from some of my newly found friends from Egypt, they send me 17 hypotheses in the paper, 12 hypotheses in the paper. Try to be selective. A paper that has 17 hypotheses is overwhelming, in all honesty. A few good hypotheses that add up to a story. That's why I said at the beginning, if you have a clearly focused paper with one idea, then you can start elaborate on this a lot more. Okay, there is a comment or two. How can I choose the approach theory to explain the relationship between X? I have two questions. And the second, the second, in many papers, the introduction contains the literature review and hypothesis. Okay, well, choice of theory, how do you choose theory? Very difficult question, but it is, because there are sometimes multiple explanations, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And again, a lot of the good journals will kind of want you to focus on one or very few theories, but some of the older European tradition, you can have multiple different parts of different theories, unless you are going to compete, the test competing hypothesis. But how you choose the theory, depending on the argument you're trying to make, or in terms of the logic you're trying to make. Certain theories are very clear about the domain, transaction cost. There are certain situation transaction costs would apply. For example, the learning approach is very clear, correct? The agency argument, that's very clear situations where there are agency. The resource-based view has been used in many settings. So sometimes you have to be careful about when to use it and when not to use it. For example, the people have been very clever in finding uses for that. So it depends on what you're really trying to accomplish, what your argument is, and that will be the major guide for the theory. That's number one. The other one is the introduction. Yes, some journals do, some papers do have all of this in the introduction and the hypothesis, all of them in one. And some other, the way I write papers, I think is the style that I'm introducing. But yes, I do realize that there is variations in that. That's correct. Okay, thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. If you let me move forward, that will be appreciated. Okay. Okay. It actually gets stuck. I don't know what I'm doing. That's okay. So if you have gone through all of this, we come to the sample. I think graduate schools, regardless of where you go, teach you a lot more about this, and a lot of people worry about this. So I'm not going to touch on all of this, but you need to tell, I'll touch on a few things. One, you need to tell the reader, how did you collect your data? What population you went after? I studied all of the privatized companies in Egypt between the year 1929 and the year 2022. And I focused on these companies that happen to be in these sectors because of this and this and this and this. Here is what I would do. Why did you focus on Egypt? Would be a couple of sentences. What about these companies that have been privatized? What about them that relates to your research question? Why this particular set of companies that you were studying? Again, you need to explain that. How did you choose them? What population? How do they relate to your research question? And here, the cleverness that I talked about early on comes to mind. Some of the good researchers really make the case to show why this is a unique and very interesting setting in which you study the relationships you study. Egypt was one of the late countries to go through privatization. and they have done this and this and this that differs from what we have seen in Eastern Europe and Latin America in terms of their privatization. And there was heavy concentration of who got all of these privatized companies in Egypt more so than in many other countries. I don't know if this is true, but I think it's true based on YouTube. I'm just, this is not a political statement in any way. So the idea is you can remove Egypt, you can put Chile or one other country, and I would say exactly the same thing. So you need to tell the people, like if you did an experiment, why did you decide to do an experiment rather than a field interview? If you use data or even use the case method, for example, you need to explain how you chose the company, how you did the data collection and so on. So you need to explain the setting and the data, and the more you give information, actually the reader will likely to understand that if your results are strange or new or different, they will understand because you have already kind of told them this is a different setting and but it's really important for that. We're seeing more and more experiments, we're seeing simulations and all of that stuff. Again, you need to tell people why and how you did it, and the more detail. More and more demands by the journals of all types for transparency. Transparency meaning how you did what you did and what you did and what the strength of what you did and the weaknesses of what you did. A good writer actually does something well important here, which is to tell very honestly what the key points, the strong points about his or her design or her data collection method, and the weaknesses. You put them up front, so that we don't wait till the last minute and trying to hide it, because people will see that. You need to say, well, even though this setting imposes all of these limitations, it has the following advantages, and on the whole, that we believe that adds credibility to our findings and all of the stuff good stuff that you will do. Again, in graduate schools, they tell you how to do measures, and again, you need to cover the dependent variable. And the thing is, in each one of these, you need to describe what exactly you did, why you did it the way you did it, just very briefly. If you take a measure that has been done in the literature before, provide studies that have done that, just to make sure you connect to the literature. It also enhances the sense of reliability and validity and so on. Again, as I have mentioned, and I think a lot of us in graduate schools, whether it's survey data or whether it's experiment, all of us deal with the independent variable and the controls and so on. So here is, this is a traditional way of doing this, a good way of summarizing this. So the different constructs the person used, how many items, the numbers behind each one of these 3 items each. Obviously, this was a survey, the mean and standard deviation, okay, or stuff like that, and the sources that I have gotten it, and so on. Again, it gives you a very quick summary. You don't have to always do that, but now papers are becoming more and more lengthy and complicated, so that helps a lot. A lot of people put it as an appendix to make it easier on the reader. Okay, yes, let me see what there is a comment. What can you remember? I'm sorry. So how to choose? I think I already answered that. Maybe introduction contains. Okay, I think I answered that. Okay. Again, you need to provide information about descriptive statistics. Again, you need. This is one of, sometimes, even though it's the easiest section to write, it is one of the worst written sections because it's written like by machines for machines. Table number 1 shows descriptive statistics, and you're gone. Correct? It doesn't tell me a lot about I looked at the sample. Here is the average. These companies compete in this industry and this industry and this industry. This is the average age, which means this, their standard deviation, ownership structure. You need to provide more context to that so I can understand. Again, analytical approach, which approach that we're using. Econometrics is taken over the field in every possible way. And again, because of the issue about identification, trying to identify causality. So whatever you need to do is you need to tell us what you have done, why you're doing it, how would you have done it? Because there are different versions, for example, of some of the statistical techniques. You need to be specific about this. So again, cite the literature connected to previous practice in that area and so on. That becomes easier. I'm not going to complain, because the more I complain, the more I get stuck on the screen. Okay, if you have survived all of this, you get into the big section of the paper that many of us look forward to, which is the discussion. In the discussion section, you have more freedom than other sections. That's where a lot of people, there is wider variability. But generally speaking, it's a good practice to start by restating what the purpose of the study, the three areas that I talked about. A big debate in the literature is this. In this study, we try to resolve this debate by doing this. We ask the question this. We studied 500,000 Indian companies that are engaged in outsourcing, and we found this and this and this. Very quickly, you can summarize the big debate, the purpose, what you have done very quickly. So all of this in like the first paragraph or maybe two. Okay, now there are different ways you can go from there. One way is to look into the results hypothesis by hypothesis. Said we developed 4 hypotheses, and we're going to discuss each one. In the first hypothesis, we predicted this, and we found no support for our hypothesis. We think that's because of this and this and this, or the results mean this for theory, or the results seem to contradict the RB tenant, but they're in support with agency argument, for example. Or the result, we don't know what the results mean, but it might be unique to our sample because of this and this and this and this. So you can be very honest about that. So you can do this hypothesis by hypothesis, okay? Or you can take the broad findings. Like there are 3 key findings from the study. One finding is this, consistent with hypothesis number 1. Second major finding is this from hypothesis 2. Number 3, do not ignore negative hypothesis or negative finding, meaning that contradict your results or do not support your results. Actually, this could be a motivation for the field to look into this for future. One of the things that I said, be direct, be honest, be straightforward and transparent, but also in explaining your findings, you have to go back to the theory that you used. Maybe you also speculate. Here we have more speculation allowed because we're going beyond what we're sticking to the data that we have done and the findings, but we're going beyond that. Okay, moving forward. Okay, maybe we should consider this interpretation. Perhaps had we done this differently in terms of doing this and this, or had we controlled for this variable, we would have done this. All of this actually try to open new frontiers in terms of doing the questions. Okay, there is a comment. Let me talk about this and see. Do you think that the research should introduce the instrumental variables in the variable tables? Thank you. I don't know what instrumental variable is in terms of causality. Is that in terms of identification, you mean? I don't know who wrote the question about instrumental variables, because there are 2 different meanings to instrumental variables. Okay, if you're able to write me a note, I will respond very specifically to that. Okay, in discussion question again, one of the key things I mentioned is what the contribution. Do you offer new theory? If your results offer new findings, that's great. Do you extend the existing theory? You need to be clear about this, and we talked briefly about this. Do you challenge existing theory, and in what ways, and so what difference? Do you offer new data and findings? So what do they tell us that we can use from here? Do you offer or introduce new constructs that other researchers can be use in future studies? And again, what the contribution of that? Again, how important is this for us moving forward? So here is the challenge. We're looking back into what we know from the literature and then looking forward at the same time. Okay, based on this finding, what do we revise in terms of what we know, and where will this take us into the future? And that's why it's the question how difficult and how complicated that is from the question came up. Okay. In dealing with indigeneity problems. So that's what I suspected. The question is, how do you introduce instrumental Debottman tables or not? Actually, I have seen it done both ways, but at a minimum, you should describe it obviously in the paper, correct? But I've seen some people, it depends on the journal you're going to submit to. So that's the best thing we have done. Like if you look into management science, I've seen it in particular. They do, they have it there. So in other journals, I've seen just in the text. So I really cannot tell you which way to do it. It depends on the journal that you're going to submit to. Okay. Again, if I move forward. Okay. The limitations of the study. The limitations are supposed to, you need to reflect on what your study's limitations are. It tells you what the boundaries of the paper, how you interpret the results. Every study is flawed, every study has imperfections. So that's what this is all about. What are the imperfections of your study? Be honest about them, be succinct about them, focus on the big issues. There are some people who will write like 3-4 pages of your limitations. The idea is that's not the idea. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. Look into how the limitations of the study might compromise the results, the credibility of what you found, and also might, in fact, inspire future research direction. One of the things I think is not a good idea, don't finish the paper by just discussing your limitation. My paper is weak in this and this and this. It just leaves bitter taste in your mouth. You need to talk about this, you need to acknowledge them and what it means. They open new directions for research and so on. But if you just list the limitations at the end, it becomes very difficult. So one of the key things that you have in some papers, we have implications for practice, for theory, for policy versus conclusion. I wanted to talk about these. To me, they are different things. Implications is different, what the difference your studies make, correct? So they should answer the question for, so what? Like, what does it mean for theory? What does it tell us about managerial practice? What does it mean for policy? That's what the implication is. Conclusion is the big picture takeaway from your study. The conclusion is the key, the big takeaway from your study. Theoretical implications. This is, as I mentioned before, that's the contribution in many ways. So what does it mean? It is a very difficult part of the paper. What does your results tell us about the theory? Is the theory valid, not valid? Should it be revised? Under what conditions should we use the theory or not use the theory? So all of these kind of questions come to mind. Does it support this theory, or does suggest that an alternative theoretical explanation is better? Does it mean that there are different research questions we should ask and what these are research questions and so on? Again, it does not have to be elaborate, but you really need to ask yourself, I use this theory, I have now the data tell me the theory is not valid in these conditions, which really is an important finding, knowing when not to use the theory. So what's the alternative? Or when should we use and should not use the theory, for example? That will be a theoretical implication. The conclusion section, my suggestion is some papers they stop there by talking about the theoretical implication or practical implication, and they're done. My suggestion is always have, as much to the extent you can, unless you're running out of space or something, have a conclusion section. 1 or 2 paragraphs. Most of the time I write 1 paragraph, and it's to be brief, memorable. Sometimes, and I don't know about you, but sometimes after I look into the abstract, I run into the last paragraph to see what the end of the story is. Okay, what is the big picture, correct? And that's a very quick way to get into the mind of the writer, if you will. It has to be satisfying, something really nice. And even if the news is bad, that the theory doesn't work, it should tell us what you have done, tell us what you found. It tells us what the next area to look into, and it should be positively written into it. I actually chose this is not mine, this is a very famous paper about continuous morphing. They studied two companies, Yahoo and something else, and as they have changed a lot in the digital space over a period of time. So they did an extensive case study, and they really looked into the area of dynamic capability, an area where I do some work, how organizations change capabilities over time and how they keep them fresh and current and so on, and how they morph, they change, they become something different. And this is their conclusion. They start with the purpose of the study. The ideas they presented in this article are consistent with the argument of the paradigm. They have two paradigms. One is hyper competition and dynamic capability. But they also tell you, they go into the broad area because they have been looking into internet companies. So it tells you that filled with a lot of entrepreneurial activities that are so on and so on. If you read this, actually, if you read the paper, it's beautifully written from beginning to end. But at the end, they do exactly this. They give you what we have done, what is the big issue, what's the key takeaway, what it means, and it's positively worded. Okay, this is, believe it or not, is the last, I think it's the last, close to the last slide, I guess. The title of the paper. I think everybody knows the title of the paper is like, that is the attention grabbing, something that has to be really nice. It has to be short, it has to be descriptive, it should be catchy and exciting. For me, the title should summarize what the article is all about. If you look into the title, you know, generally speaking, what the paper is all about, correct? Like if you're going to an action movie, you know what I mean? You know it's an action movie, correct? From the title. If it's a love story, you know from the title and the pictures that's a love story, correct? Or something like that. If you look into a tragic, like the Titanic thing, again, you can, from the title, you can do that. So I always, like I do with abstract, I always have a tentative title and then I go back and revise again and again. This is, I think there is a comment, and then I'll go over this set of slide. Do you recommend drafting the discussion and studying implication in a separate chapter or embedding it in the limitation and conclusion set? Well, for me, I don't know if you're talking about a paper versus a dissertation chapter. The discussion is one bar. So the discussion is a big section of the paper, and the conclusion and the limitation are subsections of the paper. That's the way. And if it's your thesis, then it might be your advisor, and you should you and your advisor have to agree on that. Some schools like it to be separate, some don't. So, but in a typical research paper, they're in one paper, one section. Please, what is the distinction between theoretical contribution and theoretical implication? Well, in many ways, very good question. The theoretical contribution and theoretical implication, maybe sometimes they're one and the same, sometimes not. Theoretical implication is, what does it mean for theory, for what we know, correct? Theoretical contribution may be adding new insight, something different, some construct, some argument that the RBV, I know Jay Barney quite well. I've known him for like 25 years. So when it came out, people were laughing at this because the people were trained in economics like myself, who did not think about what he was talking about. I did not laugh at him, but I just did not understand. But it took me a while to know that. So theoretical contribution is like an advance in new construct, bringing a new idea. Theoretical implication is saying, okay, so what does it mean to what we know? So they are related, but slightly different. In conclusion, this is the last, that in conclusion, and that's one of the things about writing papers. It's like good speech. I said, however good your speech is, you need to have, something that people will know that it's coming to an end. And so if you are making a bad presentation, say in conclusion, everybody will wake up and will watch this. So I'm doing the same. Just to remind you of a couple of things I said. Before you touch anything, think about your idea, talk to people. I really, if you did not get anything at all from what I'm telling you today, that's the one thing. I wanted you to go out and talk to people, think about it, talk to people who work with you, people outside your area, and actually find that very useful. My friend Van de Van used to teach the theory class here, and one of the things he did insist on all of his students going out to talk to managers. This is first year PhD student. That was their first assignment. Go and ask managers, what is one big question you're thinking about? One big problem you're dealing with? Of course, they don't always come with great ideas, but they get used to being engaged with the broader community to get ideas. Okay, think through your research question. What are you trying to say? Why is it important? Who is going to be interested, and why? Test your ideas. Talk to people, as I said, present it in conferences, share your drafts. And as I said, the last time I talked to this group, this was a few months ago, writing is difficult, but what's even more difficult is getting the paper in shape, which means you have to revise and revise and revise and revise and revise. So I was talking to one of my friends. So I was telling him I put this 5 or 4 or 5 revise and revise on the slide. She laughed and said, you need to put 40 because we all revise papers excessively. Some of our papers take several years to be finished because we go through multiple iterations to get feedback and so on. The implications will always include potential stakeholders, regulators, government, and blah, 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 blah. Well, it depends. Well, very interesting question. Should we touch on everybody? So traditionally, the implications talk about talking to other researchers, what does it mean for theory, and then what managerial implications are all, how can managers use, or entrepreneurs, or whatever. Some of the European journals and some now American journals also say, what are the policy implications? So the problem is we don't really know, at least in good American universities, we don't talk much about policy. That's not what we do. Next door to me is a great school, public policy. I actually have an honorary membership there, but the fact of the matter is in business schools, we don't talk much about policy. Maybe it's wrong. So I think for most of the journals, if you focus on the theory and talk about managerial implications, you will be safe. But again, it might be that you are in a country or a place where they think about other stakeholders. And again, that might be something you would need to think about. How approach is a good research question. How to approach a good research question? What is there a blueprint? Yes. Well, can I stop sharing and then I'll answer the question? Thank you. Okay, I am glad that I survived this sharing today. I think Muhammad, you told the computer to give me difficulty today. So the question about research question, we know research question has to be something, and this is really strange. The more passionate about the question you are, the more interesting the research question is going to be. It's like that person you love and or care about. If the more you get, if you care about, you behave differently. It's the same thing with a research question. So the thing is, if you might care about it and the field does not care about it. So you need to sell that caring about this question to other people. So sometimes you have to educate the field about your research question. But we know, and I think if Muhammad has the slides, I should say, Ustaz Al-Kabir Muhammad, has the slides from last time. And we have a couple of slides there about what is a good research question. Good research question is one that opens a new territory, something that we have not thought about. One that shuts what we know, say, this is really an old fashioned, we don't even know about it. Something that will make you wonder if what we know is worth knowing, or should we revise our whatever it is. Something that will startle you and say, wow, I never thought about this. Okay, or something you observe and you say to yourself, why do they do it this way but not this way? Contradiction in the setting. So there are different types of research questions, and all of them can actually be rich source of ideas for you, inspire you to do something really interesting. I think the problem is not that. The problem is it's almost like we are taught in graduate school to be impassionate. be descriptive, be very distant. But actually, the more you write about this with some degree of familiarity, some degree of closeness to the setting, the more you're able to define the research question. So that's why I was talking about my friend Andy Van de Ven, this engaged scholarship, meaning that you talking to managers, talking to other people in the field and so on. Dick Daft earlier in his work told us that people who talk to managers tend to produce research papers that are much stronger and much more impactful and much more widely cited. Again, but if you're talking to yourself and talking to only a couple of your students, probably you're not going to find something that is that big an issue. You know, I actually do a lot of strange things. I spend a lot of time on YouTube, listen to executive presentations. Scientists, I must have watched all of the Nobel Prize speeches on science and physics and peace literature and so on, because I'm looking for ideas. The biggest, we have tons and tons and tons and tons of publications, but the really good ideas that will say, wow, this is, how did they come up with this? And you know, sometimes I'll be watching TV and somebody will be talking and say, my God, why didn't I think about that? So that's a good research question. I'm sorry, I know it doesn't help you specifically, but this is exactly what I teach in my PhD class. I said, it's not what other people tell you, this is what the research question is. That's their impression. It's what you make of the research question, correct? So you have duality about it. You're interested in the question, and you have to get the field to tell us, to say, wow, this is really important for us. And that kind of nexus, the connection, is what makes really a great research question. Okay, I see a couple of comments. Do you consider Egypt an emerging economy? I don't know. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't know what Egypt. I have not. The last time I was in Egypt was in March, about this time in the year 1996. So I have not been in Egypt. So it's I love Egypt. I am proud of being Egyptian, and I'll always be proud of being Egyptian. But Egypt does not always love me. So I'm going to leave this. If you're Egyptians, you know what this means. Egypt is not always good to its own people. So I'm going to leave it there. But I don't know if Egypt is an emerging economy. I go to China a lot. I spend a lot of time in China, and they say they are emerging economy, but I don't think China is emerging economy. It's the second largest economy in the world. It's no longer an emerging economy. So if you wanted emerging economy is, if I say emerging economy, will they like me in Egypt? If it is, if I do that, I will do that. Okay, somebody's trying to get me in trouble, political trouble. Okay, additional question. I agree with you, would be an excellent source of something. Okay. Thank you. Okay, the most journals consider Egypt as an emerging economy. Okay, fine. Yes. Somebody, Sam, which is an international authority, said most of the journals consider Egypt an emerging economy. It's very interesting. I'm teaching this course. I teach a lot of global strategy classes. I actually teach a lot of global strategy classes more than it has always been technology and global strategy and things like that, more than entrepreneurship, for example. And we're talking about emerging economy Wednesday. And the next two class periods are about how to compete in and from emerging economies. So, and I do have a list, and you can get this from Google, where they contrast different emerging economies. And Egypt does appear on some of those lists as an emerging economy. It depends on what you want it to. So the problem with those classifications is that there is very little bit of political agenda as well. Some countries want it to be recognized as emerging economies so they can get some of the benefits from the World Bank and loans and all of the stuff. Some countries do not. So there is a little bit of that. Professor, if the point of the study is to disprove the existence of specific relationship, how would you do this in the most journalistic, statistically significant results? Okay. Very interesting question, difficult question. So the question is, journals tend to like results that are supported, correct? So if you are trying to show something that does not work, journals are not likely to be open to that. Correct. Generally speaking, that's true. Again and again, we have seen this, bias in the literature toward positive results. So if this happens, this will happen. If you come back and say, no, it doesn't happen. So the best thing about to answer that question is to show when it does not happen and why. So the problem is with the studies that show negative is that you cannot prove negative. But if you show it does not work in certain conditions, then it becomes much easier. I have produced papers that say the results don't work, correct? And actually, some of them are widely cited because of that, because they have done that. So it is not that I intended to disprove that, but actually I showed that it works this way. In this case, it does not work under these conditions. And if we revise these conditions, then the results would be quite different. So, but the bias that you're talking about is in fact there. The reason why it is hard to publish studies with negative results, because as I said before, every study has limitations. So we don't know if these things have not been disproved because of the limitations of the study or alternative explanations that are not easily inferred from the results, like omitted variables or a misspecification of the models or things like that. So it becomes very, very difficult. Okay. Do you have a channel on YouTube or any other social media account I would follow? No, I don't. I just watch other people. I live vicariously. I love people who do strange things. I love people who are daring and do strange things because I spend most of my time behind my computer. So I don't. I don't have many. I only have, my wife is the one who has all of these things like Facebook and Twitter and all of these, I don't. I actually try to hide away from people as much as I can so I can do my writing. So, but when I am looking for something, I do look, I like things that are different. I like things that are different. Okay, I have a related question. How serious is it if the results are not significant? Very good question. This is really an important question. The question is, how serious is it if the results are not significant? More and more journals good journals actually are publishing papers where the results are not significant. Okay, but I think the answer to the question is a little bit more complicated than this. If we can trust that you did the right things in your design, sample selection, the analysis, then we can accept that the results are not significant. The problem is, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is that omitted variables or variables that you do not include in the model, or the model is specification, or you're using the wrong sample, can make the results kind of look funny, and that's why it is. But more and more journals realizing that again, and that's why we're seeing more and more attempt at replication across disciplines. Okay. Good questions. You're making me think today, which is really very difficult. Okay, is it important always to have a robustness test and multiple alternative ways and so on? Yeah, another important question. In my generation, it used to be when I was an assistant professor, we were pushed to talk about the limitations of the study and so on. But now, a lot of the journals, in the strategy field, for example, and if you look into a department like mine, we probably were among the kind of the strongest in using econometrics and all of this stuff. So a lot of my colleagues were trained primarily in economics and sociology, and they brought this tradition into strategy, and they have been pushing for a lot of this stuff. And if you look into back for the last 15 years, it has become a big wave now in strategy, entrepreneurship, and supply chain, and all of this stuff. So more and more with that comes from the economic tradition. Robustness checks are becoming more and more. Robustness checks, meaning that the results hold even if you change some of the parameters in your design, correct? So if you change, like if you have a dependent variable, you measure it in this way. If you change that definition, will the results hold? Or if you remove some of the variable there, or some of the variables and the independent variables are measured different, will the results hold? If some of the variables are removed, will the model remain fairly robust, meaning produce close enough results? For example, that's a rigorous way of trying to establish validation or validity. Not universality, but at least that there is enough sufficient predictive power to your model, okay? That's what it is. Okay, what else? Happy to answer your questions. I see Samir has a question. Okay, Abdul Hakim, or yeah, yes, Samir.
Samir Trabelsi from Brock University, Ontario, Canada. I'm a professor of accounting and governance. Just to really thank you.
Samir, are you originally Egyptian?
No, I'm from Tunisia originally. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's even great. Yeah.
You know, I cannot miss this opportunity to really thank you for the insight you are giving to our emerging generation of scholars in the Middle East, and to just let this crowd hear that you are really an inspiration and role model for all of us. Thank you so much for doing this on a Sunday. I know how important Sunday for academic, because we work like crazy, but coming today and giving this workshop is really nice of you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm grateful. I honestly feel embarrassed that you said that, but I'm grateful. I've been. I'll say this. One of the strangest things that happened to me multiple times when I was an assistant professor is I will be in a I used to be embarrassed when I go into conferences because I was doing so badly. So you go to a conference, they give you your name tag. I used to remove my name tag before I talk so people would not remember my name. Because I did so badly, correct? And one day I saw this man and very famous person, and he calls my name, and I was startled. I like, what the hell? This was terror, correct? And I looked and I said, no, that cannot be. Nobody knows my name, correct? And then the person called my name again, and then I said, are you talking to me? He said, yeah. Oh, well, anyway, to make the long story short, we sat down for 45 minutes. I don't remember what he said. But he was basically telling me, he saw 3 or 4 of my presentations and was telling me what to do and not to do very nicely. I honestly don't, my legs were shaking, my body was this and this and this. I went to another conference 2 weeks later, another person did the same thing. So I just found out that the more, and this has always been the story of my career, not only me, but many of us, that were not trained in the top university. I was not trained in top universities. So, but the thing is, that a lot of people who are very well accomplished are also among the most helpful. You know what I mean? And it's probably because they do know the struggle that we all go through. And I think, what I'm doing is absolutely close to nothing, and I'm happy to be part of this. But what really would be happy, and Professor, you know this, and at least in the top American conferences, I don't see a lot of people from
our countries.
Our countries. So, and very often I am the only person in the major universities in the United States and in all of these places that have been invited. And honestly, it used to be like this for Korean faculty. It used to be Chinese, but that has changed. So, and they do have their organizations. They talk, they organize, and do stuff like that. And so it's always nice to be one of a kind, except in this case, correct? After a while, it becomes lonely. You know what I mean? And it's just when you see a Tunisian or Algerian or Egyptian or Saudi, it's really amazing. It's really a great experience because there is something about that, something that it's validation. It's failure is very personal, but success is a group kind of thing, actually. So
absolutely.
So that's something that I hope. That's why I was excited when Muhammad invited, I should say, the honorable organizer invited me, and it's because of that, because we all need to connect and reach out. Yeah, please.
And for the crowd that are here, I strongly advise you. I can tell you, there is a confidence. I make this reading a required reading in my corporate governance class. Professor Zahra has a review of literature on board of director attribute and performance, and you know what? It's really, really an excellent read. So I strongly advise you to go and read it. I can tell you, my executive MBA, my undergrad, they find it extremely helpful to analyze and assess how board of director attribute impact the role they do and the outcome of the organization. So go look at that. It's an excellent read. And thank you again, Professor, for doing that.
Oh, thank you. This looks like history. This was, I think, the article was 1980. One of the articles.
Absolutely, but it's still relevant to this day. I can tell you.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Okay, this is not about me. This is, I'm happy to answer questions.
Now, I have a question.
Yes.
Frequently, and this is the scholar in our region, they are always scared that somebody steal their idea.
Yes.
And I tell them, I wish somebody's going to steal your idea. Go to conference, present to each other. No worry, if somebody steal your idea, it's not a big deal. I mean, nobody can do the same exact way of thinking. So exactly. What your intake of this?
Well, I said it before. Go out, talk, present. Actually, the problem, I promise you, I have like 84 something entries on my iPhone. I keep this notes on my iPhone because I talk to myself. I go out. So the thing is, ideas are plenty. And if somebody steals your idea, you can do it better, or you will come up with a different idea. And I honestly don't remember people stealing ideas. I have not seen it. I have not, I'm sure it does happen to some extent. I think it's much more of a cultural thing, correct? That people are afraid of your neighbor knowing what you're doing or how much money you have in the bank and all of this stuff. So I think the more openness you are, and you don't trust yourself, because if somebody steals your idea, you can come up with a lot of ideas. And I honestly believe that. And I can give you a book of ideas. So talking about articles that one of the articles that I read many years ago. It's not mine. I don't read my work. That's the good thing about my work. I write it and I let other people read it. I really don't want to read my work. I get afraid because I would not like what I've done. So, but one of the articles was from Harvard Business Review, and it asks a very simple, stupid question. What will happen if your competitors steal the book, your strategic plan? Meaning they know what you're going to do. The idea, of course, they're going to know everything I'm going to do. The article says, well, they can steal that, but they're not going to implement it as well. And that's what the professor was saying. But secondly, they don't know what you have, which is the intellectual capital behind your plan, the organization, all of the invisible, intangible resources that you will marshal and mobilize to make things happen. They cannot do that. And that's, we all are curious about what other people are doing and so on, but I think that's what you're doing. I just noticed a name on the screen. So since Ahmed Tantawi, good to see you. I saw the name. My friend from Kent University. I've not seen him in a while. Okay.
Abdul Karim, you have a question?
Hello. Hello, everyone here. However, did not thank people, did not thank God. So thank you very much to wonderful presentation. And no matter how many words of thanks you give, we cannot fulfill your right, dear doctor. You have done a lot of for us, and we were not able to honor you. Here are my best wish for health and wellness. In addition, I offer you sincerely heartfelt words of thanks. I would you like thank all the organizers for such scientific forums, as well as all the attendants, each in his one name. My question, dear doctor, is how to make your article or research paper more readable after publication, and increase the and increase the chance of its acceptance by reviewers. And last question, how can I be like you, dear doctor? And thank
Oh,
you.
no, you don't want to be like, you do not want to be like me. So you don't know me. I honestly say this to my students, female students especially. I said, do not fall in love with or marry somebody like me. So, so the same thing, you know. I really mean this. I really mean this. No, I'm truly humbled. I almost gonna cry because of your comments. Thank you. That's not what I do. What this is all about. So it's I just lost my words because of your comments, and I'm grateful for that. So two questions. One of them was how to increase the chances of acceptance. Actually, doing a lot of the things we talked about today. Uh, but go and get your papers, going back to the comment about sharing your ideas, but also getting people to read your articles, presenting your article, and getting feedback, revising, getting critical feedback. And that could be difficult, I know, for some of you in wherever you are in the Arab world and other parts of the Middle East. So it's a culture that has not developed like this. Here we do read each other's work. We provide feedback, critical feedback. You can be extremely critical, but also a good friend. You know what I mean? In fact, you can be a good friend by being critical. And that's a good way. So getting these. Also, you can do a number of things. You can make sure that you look into the journal before you submit to make sure that your paper looks like and feels like, and citing the literature from those journals into your paper. That helps a great deal, and also adds to that. But I honestly believe presenting your papers in conferences and so on to get feedback, and learning to get feedback, and do that. All of these things add to your credibility, to the paper, and the chances of that. I forgot the first question that you had. You asked me after your publication, what there was another thing you asked me, Abdul Karim. There was another question.
How to make your article research paper more readable after publication.
Oh, okay. Oh, this is good. This is good. Yeah, very, very. Yes. So one of the most famous consistent problems that I ever got was about my writing style. When I got my master's, my PhD from American universities, and I had very good advisors. I was lucky, but every time I submitted to even medium-sized journals, they came back, the papers are unreadable because complex structure. And in truth, if you're writing poetry, love stories, the Arabic language is amazing. If you're writing scientific stuff, not so. It's very verbose, a lot of words, correct? So English is much more precise and much more direct. So get it edited professionally. Get the paper edited if you can, for language. Get somebody, as I mentioned a couple of times, getting people to read it. Okay. I actually find out that the more you simplify the writing, the easier it is. When you write, use a lot of examples, graphs, illustration, anything that will make things easier to follow. that will really will be some of the things you were that I would recommend. My question is, presenting papers and conferences does not what in publication process, and the research question will be old and well. So the question is, if I take time to present and so on, wouldn't this delay my submission? Yes, sometimes it does, but sometimes that's a good thing. Correct, because you're going to get a better paper. So when it goes to the journal, it will have a higher chance of acceptance. Sometimes when you rush to send it to the journal, it comes back rejected. It depends on what journal you're talking about. The better journals are used to papers. Actually, they favor you getting people to read the papers, they revise it, and so on. I think it depends on your time frame. In my case, for example, I'll be working on multiple papers. Some of them are 3-4 years in process before I even dare to submit them to the journals, because you want it to work on the limitations of the paper before you send it out. And that's again, this is my job. That's what we do for a living, correct? And so I know that I have to manage multiple projects going on at the same time, and that's part of the process. So it's a cultural thing, organizational cultural thing, and we do that. Some of the PhD, the assistant professors in my department, their papers, the first 2-3 years, they have no publications whatsoever. But then when they hit the journals on big scale, big publications, and because again, they take their time to do that. So it's a matter of trade-off between higher probability of acceptance and higher quality of papers. I think the problem is you wanted to finish it and you wanted to send it out tomorrow. So I know you wanted to get it off your desk, and I really do understand that. I have done that earlier in my career as well. Yes. Okay.
Saham, you have a question?
Saham.
Hi, Shaker. Thank you so much for this very informative presentation. It's actually not a question, it's more of comment on what you have said a lot. I've learned a lot today, and more specifically, I want to comment on something because usually there are two or different schools when it comes to writing your paper. Some say you have to start from the literature and see where are the gaps and how you are going to fill that gap. And others say that you might get inspired from reality and from working with entrepreneurs or whatever phenomenon under study, and then you can go to examine that phenomenon. So I see that you clearly mentioned both schools, and both of them are fine. Because I struggle with that issue at the moment, because usually I have experience working with startups and entrepreneurs, and usually I get inspired from a real phenomenon, and I ask myself, oh, that's really interesting. So how can I, how those entrepreneurs survived with resource scarcity, and I go and I do that. Or maybe another topic, I feel like for me, it works really well. However, some people say, oh, this is really wrong approach. So,
well, yeah, so some of the people who don't publish well always make that distinction, correct? They always wanted to sound more theoretical than they should be. So for me, as you said, not only said it both ways, I have used it a lot both ways, correct? I have started, but in the example you have just given me, I can easily accommodate this. So you can start by Andy van der Ven. I'll use you have seen one of his presentations recently, I know, online. So, but I sat in his classes many years ago when he was teaching the PhD seminar on theory. This is 14 weeks of theory building. Amazing person. But what he does, he has this 5-paragraph approach. He calls it, let's say somebody by the name Adam called the insect today because this and this and this. And they said, people like Adam, there are 425,000 people who call sick every day. Correct? This is a big problem. So this is the story. And then the issue of how employee absenteeism due to illness is very widely discussed in the literature. So-and-so said this, so-and-so did this. And one explanation that how to deal with that issue has become really a big research question. So what he started with the phenomenon, started kind of generalizing into a research question, and then starts into the theory. That's one way. You could easily reverse that. One of the most serious problems organizations encounter, according to so-and-so, or research and organization says, one of the most serious problems is this, and so on, so on. In fact, the United States Department of Labor or the Norwegian Department of Labor says X number of employees and discuss companies this, and this raises the question in the literature on that. Applying this theory, so-and-so argued this, and so on. So you can actually start either with the research question setting, and then you embody the phenomenon and the theory, or the other way around. For me, they are not separated. In fact, quotes from executives, quotes from annual reports, quotes from now in YouTube, and there are a lot of presentations, TED Talks, executives, I don't know if you use TED Talks, amazing, you know what I mean? One of the most amazing things, and this is, it's stuck in my mind. I was coming back from China, and I saw one of those talks about this guy does not own a clock, does not have a watch, does not have a computer, and he never misses a meeting. You know what I mean? And that's what his talk is all about.
Yeah.
So you might not see this. I have a clock, I have my iPhone, I have to make sure that I'm managing my time. So I'm just trying to figure out, how does a person do this? Then I remember, the time when we did not have all of these technologies, and we did very well. So I started with this phenomenon. I'm actually thinking about how do organizations that don't follow the normal clock function. It's not the technical chronological clock like we all use in terms of managing time, but in terms of the culture, organizations that don't move with the market, they are actually slower or faster than the market because of that. So I'm kind of, from that one observation, I generalized it into a bigger question. I don't know if I'll ever write a paper like this or not, but it's one of the things I've been thinking
Very
about.
inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just worried. I have all the time for you. I'm not sure about your time. But I do have the time as much as you want. Any questions, any comments? Any questions or comments? How to contribute to research in a novel manner? Well, that's what we have been talking about all day today. By answering a different question, coming up, even just asking a question we have not asked about before, offering a very startlingly different answer, that will be really interesting. So there is research and there is publication, correct? So I think a lot of us are engaged in publications, but publications that we forget because it just do not tell us a lot of newness. So it's like how to produce research that's novel and impactful. That's the kind of question. Things that stick in your mind, you know what I mean? It's very different. So yeah, studying subjects that people did not want to think about. So here is a subject that I don't know how it is in Egypt or in the Middle East right now. In the United States, sexual harassment is a very big issue, and I'm sure there is a Me Too movement in Egypt. I know that, and so the president even talking about that, correct? But in the United States, also questions about sexual identity, transgenders in the workplace, and so on. How is this going to change the workplace, for example? That's something I'm sure there will be a lot of research on that. So it's a kind of, whether you study it, whether you agree with it, or not, that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm sure somebody will be studying this. If you think about entrepreneurs, are these people people who are transgender, they make decisions differently? Do they create companies that are different from the other? Do they manage their organizations differently? Do they focus on particular groups of customers differently. You know what I mean? Are they technologically adept? Are they more artistic? So a lot of these things that, again, that will be an, again, I'm not encouraging you or discouraging you from studying this, but that studying a phenomenon that has not been well studied will actually, that will be a contribution, correct? You take about we have millions and millions of refugees from Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine, and of course Libya, and all of the Yemen, the war in Yemen, all of these places. Refugee entrepreneurship, for example, a topic I would never have imagined, but I know several people are studying refugee entrepreneurship and how different it is, and so on. In fact, my friend Gary Bruton from Texas Christian University and I collaborating with some people in Turkey, because they have hundreds of thousands of refugees from Syria, and these people are stuck, and all of a sudden they're in refugee camps. They never bargained for that, but they're starting to create business, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden the Turkish police is very interested in the research we're interested in, because they found that, you know, some of the researchers infiltrate those camps to know what these people. So you can see a lot of stories there. You know, we never, you know, so surprises happen along the way that open your eyes to questions that we never thought about. I never thought about studying refugee entrepreneurship until somebody called me and said, you know, we have this, you know, my friends in Turkey said, we have, look at what they're doing, and it's amazing. And then of course, I don't do this. I called a couple of people I know that are interested, and it has become, I saw Mr. Tantawi, or I don't know if he was still online or not. Yeah, so he was in his advisor in Cornell, and myself and a couple of people are looking into military spending, military service, as how it affects entrepreneurship, for example. In some countries like Israel, study after study will tell you why Israel has become a technology center, is that military service, because these people are bonded, they are connected to global international venture capital, the global markets, and so on. Again, some other countries, in the United States, we know there is a lot of military spin-off. So the question is, how does this affect entrepreneurial activities? So there are a million ways to do that if you open your eyes for the opportunities. And the more you do, the more actually opportunities come your way. It defines the kind of research questions that you are doing. Okay. Is it possible to study the effect of qualitative variables on quantitative variable? Qualitative variable like what? Love, for example, like aesthetics? Yes. The answer. So for example, I remember being in the Norwegian School of Management, where I used to go to teach from time to time. This woman was really doing a fantastic study. She was looking into the color of offices, the height of the wall, you know, from the floor distance, the windows and the size, all of these things, how it affects employee productivity and job satisfaction. It's not the kind of work I do, but that will be a good example of that. What's the impact of the impact of management on performance of insurance companies? That will be a good example. Do you recommend that it be a standard study, that analytical study, or for a questionnaire? The choice of the type of data collection has to do based on what you're really trying to do. It's not necessarily the research question and the perspective you're using, the theory will use. That's how you choose a study. Would you advise young researchers to develop their own collaborativeness? What do you do? Yeah. How do you develop a collaborative? I think that's one of the things that are missing. If I see that in the Middle East, where I come from, in fact, the new editor of Journal of International Business Studies was talking to me about this about 2 weeks ago. We don't see a lot of papers from people from that part of the world. We did a presentation at the Academy of International Business in Dubai. At the end of the presentation, this woman stood up and said, "Who gives you the right to come and tell us what to do?" I said, "You're right. I don't have to be there. I'll go to China instead." So I didn't say that, but I thought that way. So what do you do? Actually, one of the best things that happened in my career, if I have accomplished anything in my career, it's not because I'm smart or anything like that. It's just because I got lucky. I got to work with a lot of very good people, a lot of very interesting people. My students, my colleagues, people I met randomly. One of my collaborators lives in Australia. I actually wrote 5 papers with him over a period of 4 years before I actually looked at his picture online. I never met the person. He wrote to me and said, I'm interested. I got excited about that. We wrote then one night I woke up and I looked at his picture online. So that's how it tells you 4 years after we started working. So my advice, yes, you can, how to collaborate. Actually connecting with people, talking to people, going to conferences is one of the best places to do. I don't know what many conferences in Egypt or other parts of the Middle East or wherever you live. So I'm sorry if I keep repeating that, but because I don't know. I got used to the American way. We have a lot of conferences, we go, we meet, we talk, and all of this stuff. And, so that offers a lot of, but, the internet is your best friend, correct? You can reach people. But before you reach out to people, you need to be also reasonable. What do you have to offer and what are you expecting? You have to be a little bit clear about this. So I'm always open for collaboration, but the problem is if you're asking me to do a study on supply chain management and I'm not into that, probably I'm not gonna, or, it has to be some commonality, some mutuality and all of this stuff. What else should I thank you? Okay. Will you share the presentation? Yes, I will definitely share the presentation. I'm going to send the slide. I usually do that, but this time I didn't. I should have. So that's why the computer was upset with me, I guess. But yes, and of course, Professor, you're always welcome to share it with everyone. Okay, any questions, any comments?
Thank you very much, dear Professor Shakir Zahra, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. And did this all. That's for me. Thank you, everyone, join us today, and thank you very much, dear Professor Shakir Zahra, to take time today to present to us. It's been really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see everyone, and all the best. Okay, bye bye. Bye bye.
Recording stopped.